He was the most feared man in the city, a mafia boss with a heart frozen in pride. One call, one moment he ignored, would change everything. She was carrying his child, and he had no idea what he had lost. Watch to see the night that shattered his world, and the life he'll risk everything to protect. Welcome back to Heart-Woven Tales. I'm your storyteller, Selena. I hope you're doing well. I'd love to know, where are you listening to me from today? Drop it in the comments. Make sure you watch till the very last chapter, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heart-stirring stories. Now, let's dive in. The city of New Verona lay quiet under a starless sky, but inside Lorenzo DeLuca's penthouse, the air felt heavy, almost alive, with the kind of tension only power and secrets could summon. He stood before the enormous glass windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, the neon glow of the city reflecting off the polished marble floors, casting fractured, gold-tinged light across his sharp features. His broad shoulders were tense beneath the tailored suit he never loosened, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp, scanning the horizon as though searching for something that wasn't there. A glass of whiskey rested in his hand, the amber liquid trembling slightly with the subtle pulse of his fingers, a tremor he had never admitted, not even to himself. It was a tremor born of memory, of longing, of something soft and dangerous buried beneath the layers of iron and blood that made him feared. His mind wandered, unbidden, to a name he had tried to forget, a face he thought he had erased, Liana. He had told himself for months that her absence was a relief, that the life he led demanded she was gone. He had convinced himself that love was a weakness, that attachments were chains for fools, and that he could survive perfectly fine without her presence, without her warmth. But that belief was about to be tested in the cruelest way. A sudden vibration shattered the silence, the low hum of the phone against the marble countertop resonating like a gunshot in the stillness. He turned, eyes narrowing as the screen lit up with a name that pierced through the armor he had so carefully built. Liana. For a long moment he simply stared at the glowing letters, frozen between disbelief and instinct. She shouldn't be calling. She had left months ago, leaving behind an absence that he had tried and failed to fill with power, wealth, and control. Pride whispered in one ear, cold and commanding, "Do not answer, you are not weak." Bitterness whispered in the other, coarser, sharper. She chose to leave, let her wait. But underneath it all, something raw and unhealed quivered inside him, a whisper he had long ignored, one that spoke of missed chances, of regrets, of moments stolen by his own ego. The phone vibrated again, insistent, urgent, a sound that seemed to demand he pay attention, that refused to be ignored. Miles away, in a cramped, dimly lit apartment, Liana trembled as her body betrayed her. Her belly was heavy with 8 months of fragile life, her hands shaking as she pressed them over the tiny movements of the child inside her, feeling the faint, hopeful kicks that reminded her she was not alone. But pain racked her body violently, twisting through her ribs and her back, each wave sharper than the last. She tried to crawl toward the counter where her phone lay, vision blurring, stomach clenching with desperation. Her voice, weak and broken, barely escaped her lips as she whispered into the emptiness, "Please, just pick up. Please, I need you." Her fingertips grazed the cool surface of the phone, and she pressed the call button again, the screen lighting up like a fragile beacon in the darkness. Back in the penthouse, Lorenzo's pride held firm. He turned his back on the glowing device, dismissing the ringing as an intrusion he had no intention of tolerating. "She's calling for forgiveness. Or pity," he muttered under his breath, the words tasting bitter even to him. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, the liquid sliding down his throat like fire, trying to drown the unease rising in his chest. Each vibration that continued against the marble countertop gnawed at him, a reminder of the world he had left behind, the woman he had ignored, the life he had taken for granted. He told himself that silence was strength, that distance was clarity, that the past no longer belonged to him. But Liana's struggle did not pause for his ego. She collapsed again, this time fully, hitting the floor with a painful thud that made her gasp and cry out weakly. Her hands clutched at the tiles, trembling uncontrollably as she curled around her belly in a futile attempt to protect herself and her daughter. Her breaths came in short, jagged bursts, and her body quivered as if each second was a battle she might not survive. She reached desperately for the phone, sliding it closer with shaking hands, whispering once more, "Lorenzo, please, I'm begging you, don't let me do this alone." Tears stung her eyes, blurring the dimly lit room, making the familiar surroundings alien and threatening. In the penthouse, Lorenzo finally pressed the power button, cutting off the phone entirely. The glowing letters disappeared, swallowed by darkness, and with it, he believed he had severed the call from his life. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he had maintained control. Yet an odd weight pressed against his chest, a cold shiver running down his spine he couldn't explain. He swirled the whiskey in his glass and took a slow sip, tasting nothing but bitterness, unaware that far below him, the life he had ignored was unraveling with every passing second. Liana's vision blurred further, the room spinning around her as she struggled to remain conscious. Each wave of pain brought her closer to collapse, her hands gripping her swollen belly, whispering apologies to the tiny life within her. "Stay with me. Mommy's here. Don't go." Her voice cracked, weak but determined, a plea that the universe seemed to ignore. She slid along the floor, inch by inch, trying to reach the door, to reach someone, to reach help. Her phone skittered from her grasp, landing just out of reach, the screen still glowing with the call Lorenzo refused to answer. The wail of sirens cut through the night, rising steadily, urgent and chaotic. Paramedics raced toward her building, their footsteps pounding on concrete, their voices sharp with the need to act before it was too late. Liana's pulse faltered, her breathing shallow. Each heartbeat fragile and fleeting, slipping closer to danger with every passing second. Her eyes fluttered, half-lidded, vision dimming, and she pressed a trembling hand to her belly, praying the life inside her could survive what she might not. In the penthouse, Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey absently, the vibrations of the city below brushing past his awareness. A sudden chill ran down his spine, sharp and unnatural, and for a moment he paused, as if he felt something he couldn't see, a warning perhaps, or a premonition. He dismissed it, shaking his head, telling himself he had done nothing wrong, and yet the cold persisted, creeping into his bones, a silent echo of the moment he had already lost. The ambulance screeched to a halt beneath Liana's window, its lights painting the walls in red and blue. Frantic and insistent, the paramedics burst inside, moving with precise urgency, lifting her fragile body onto a stretcher, her tiny daughter inside her stirring weakly, a heartbeat small but alive against the turmoil. Her phone lay on the floor, glowing with the missed call that could have changed everything, a silent witness to the choice Lorenzo had made, a choice that would echo for the rest of his life. And in two separate worlds divided by walls and decisions, fate paused. Lorenzo sipped his whiskey, oblivious to the life hanging by seconds below him. Liana's eyes fluttered open once more, a faint spark of hope igniting before pain dragged her back into unconsciousness. The sirens blared closer, their wails cutting through the city, carrying the weight of consequences Lorenzo would never anticipate. The moment he turned off his phone was the moment everything began to unravel. Her last plea hung in the air, unanswered. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which life would survive the night. The first flicker of fear, the first hint of loss would come too late, and Lorenzo had no idea how irreversibly the pieces of his world were about to shatter. The unanswered call glowed faintly in the dark apartment. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The night swallowed the echo of a choice that could never be undone, and Lorenzo remained unaware that this single act, the simplest, most human moment he ignored, was the moment that would define the rest of his life. The ambulance screeched through the streets of New Verona, red and blue lights slicing through the darkness as though trying to carve a path directly to fate itself. Liana lay on the stretcher, her body limp, trembling violently with each heartbeat that fought against the tide of complications, consuming her fragile form. Her small hands clutched her belly instinctively, fingers curling around the roundness of life growing inside her, the tiny rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat, almost imperceptible, but stubbornly alive. Sweat slicked her brow, her hair plastered against her temples, and her lips whispered faintly, cracked and trembling, "Mommy's here. Stay with me. Don't leave me." The words were barely audible over the wailing sirens and the rush of paramedics moving with practiced urgency, their voices sharp commands in the chaos of emergency care. As the sliding doors of the hospital opened, the smell of antiseptic and sterilized metal hit her senses, harsh and biting, but her mind barely processed it. Her world had shrunk to the tiny, fragile life she carried, and the terror that each second might be the last for both of them. The paramedics maneuvered her through the bright, harshly lit corridors, the sound of her shallow breathing competing with the rhythmic beeping of monitors along the way. Nurses and doctors swarmed, hands moving quickly, cords being attached, monitors being checked, IVs being readied, oxygen masks placed with precision. Time itself seemed suspended, the world narrowed to sterile walls, the faint, fragile pulse she felt against her belly, and the knowledge that every second was a battle against inevitability. The doctor, a tall woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, barked instructions to her team, each order cutting through the air like a blade. "Vitals! Blood pressure now! Prepare the emergency kit. She's decompensating fast." Her voice was calm but urgent, a sharp contrast to the frantic movement surrounding her. Liana's body trembled violently as another wave of pain crashed through her, making her cry out, a sound that was swallowed almost immediately by the chaos. Her fingers dug into the crisp hospital sheets, leaving shallow crescent-shaped marks, desperate to hold on to something tangible while her body threatened to give way entirely. Somewhere beyond the sterile walls, the doctor tried once again to reach Lorenzo DeLuca. Each call made was met with silence, the relentless tone of an unanswered phone echoing in the cold, unfeeling hospital corridor. The nurse, a quiet figure who had stayed close to Liana since the ambulance arrived, tried to maintain a calm facade, but her hands shook slightly as she redialed the number for the 100th time. She whispered under her breath, "Come on, please answer, just one more time." Each ring of the phone seemed painfully loud, each vibration echoing through the small space like a drumbeat of impending doom. Yet the line went unanswered. Lorenzo's ego, his stubborn pride, had locked the door she could no longer knock on, and the consequences of that choice were already unfolding with cruel precision. Liana drifted in and out of consciousness, her eyelids heavy, vision swimming with indistinct shapes and light. She tried to speak, tried to push her lips to form words that might reach him, even across the expanse of distance and the stubborn wall of his indifference. "Please, just one more time. Pick up. I need you." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, her throat dry, her chest heaving as pain tore through her abdomen. Each breath was a battle, each heartbeat a fragile victory against a body that had begun to betray her. Tiny, desperate kicks fluttered inside her, the only reminder that someone she loved more than life itself, still depended on her strength, even if he would never know it. The nurse bent closer, whispering reassurances, her voice low and soft, almost pleading. "It's okay, Liana. We're here. Just hang on. Let me try him again." Her fingers shook as they moved to press the numbers on the phone once more, dialing the number with an almost reverent care. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Liana's eyelids flickered, a single tear rolling down her cheek as the monitor beside her began to beep in irregular, alarming patterns. Each beep, each tiny, shrill alarm felt like a hammer striking against her fragile body, echoing in her ears, echoing in the sterile corridor, echoing in the life she was desperate to protect. The doctor's voice cut through the moment, sharp, precise. "Monitor her heart. BP dropping rapidly. She's decompensating. Prepare for code red if it worsens." Her eyes flicked toward the nurse, who had stopped midway through the last redial, tension carved deep into her face. Liana groaned, a sound raw, primal, full of fear and pleading, the sound of life clinging desperately to a body refusing to cooperate. Her head rolled slightly to one side, eyes half closed, vision blurred, but the determination inside her burned like a fragile flame against the dark storm of her failing body. Minutes passed, each one stretching impossibly long, each one threatening to tip the scales between life and death. The monitor's alarms grew more insistent, the beeping jagged, erratic, a staccato rhythm that matched the chaos in the nurse's mind. Liana's breathing became shallow and ragged, her small chest rising and falling in uneven waves. The room felt smaller, tighter, the walls closing in with a suffocating weight as the urgency of the emergency care pressed down on everyone present. The nurse looked once more at the phone, trembling hands hovering over the keypad, each second that passed slicing through her like a knife. "Please, please, just one more time," Liana whispered, barely audible, her fingers brushing against her belly, trying to soothe the tiny life inside. The nurse's hands shook violently, pressing the final buttons, holding her breath as the line connected. It rang and rang and rang. Each pulse of sound seemed to reverberate through the air, a warning, a signal, a desperate hope clinging to the fragile threads of life. Then suddenly, silence. The ringing stopped. No answer. The phone went dead, a cruel punctuation that shattered hope in a single devastating moment. The doctor's eyes widened, snapping toward the monitor that now beeped erratically, lights flashing red. "She's crashing! Start the resuscitation protocols, now!" Orders shouted back and forth, hands moving in a frantic, coordinated rhythm, IV lines shifting, oxygen masks pressing against trembling lips, adrenaline surging through every professional in the room. Liana groaned, a sound raw and fractured, her body shaking uncontrollably as another contraction hit, relentless and merciless. Her tiny daughter inside her stirred faintly, the heartbeat fluttering, a fragile signal of life in a body that had begun to betray its will to survive. Every second stretched longer, each one heavier with consequence. The nurse's face, pale and drawn, showed the weight of helplessness, of the cruel reality that the person who could have changed everything was out of reach. Liana's breaths came in shallow bursts, each one a victory against the darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. Her hands gripped the edges of the stretcher, knuckles white, nails digging into the metal, the only anchor she had to the world outside her spiraling body. She whimpered, half-conscious, voice trembling. "Please, just stay." The alarms grew louder, sharper, insistent, echoing through the emergency room, each beep a nail in the coffin of the fragile world she was clinging to. Doctors and nurses moved faster, their steps a blur of urgency, yet every movement felt like a race against inevitability. Liana's lips quivered, eyes flickering open briefly, catching the fluorescent hospital lights like distant stars she could barely focus on. Her heart, her pulse, the very rhythm of life inside her, fought against the chaos, against the failure of those around her, against the absence of the man who could have made a difference with a single touch, a single answer to a ringing phone. And in that suspended moment, as monitors beeped jagged warnings, as her body trembled violently with the struggle for life, as hands moved in precise urgency to keep her alive, the fragile thread connecting mother and unborn daughter shone like a faint, defiant spark. Time itself seemed to shatter, breaking into tiny fragments that scattered across the sterile room, leaving only the pulse of life and the weight of choices made too late. The nurse's hands hovered over the phone, trembling, the line dead, the chance lost, and the first true sense of irreversible consequence descended like a shadow over every heartbeat, every breath, every agonized whisper of, "Mommy's here. Stay with me." 3. The operating room was a hive of controlled chaos, sterile lights glaring down with cold precision, reflecting off the gleaming instruments and polished floors, as though spotlighting the battle between life and death, unfolding within its walls. Every movement was deliberate, precise, and urgent. Nurses darted back and forth, hands gloved and trembling, adjusting monitors, pulling charts, connecting IV lines, and checking vitals in rapid succession. The rhythmic beeping of machines underscored the tension, its sharp, insistent tone, a metronome counting down the fragile moments they had left. Liana lay on the surgical table, her body pale and glistening with sweat, chest rising and falling with agonizing irregularity. Her breaths shallow, jagged, each one a victory against a body that had begun to betray her. Her small, delicate hands rested protectively over the curve of her swollen belly, the only barrier she could offer to a fate that threatened to pull her away from the life she carried. The doctor's eyes were sharp, unblinking, scanning the monitors with a precision born from years of experience, calculating the narrow margin that separated survival from tragedy. "Heart rate dropping," she barked, voice calm yet tinged with urgency, slicing through the sterile air like a scalpel. Nurses responded instantly, adjusting medications, administering fluids, pressing their gloved hands against her trembling arms, all movements precise yet frantic in their coordination. Each second felt like an eternity, stretching the fragile thread of hope thinner and thinner. Liana's vision flickered, shadows moving at the edges of her consciousness as pain and weakness wrestled for control. Her lips parted, whispering words barely audible over the mechanical chorus of life support. "Tell him. She deserves love, even if I couldn't have his." Her voice trembled with exhaustion, yet every syllable carried the weight of her love, her hope, and the life she was about to leave behind. A sudden spike in the monitors sent alarms blaring, the shrill sound echoing through the room with terrifying intensity. Nurses and doctors reacted instantly, hands moving in choreographed urgency, a flurry of motion around Liana's fragile form. Each instrument clicked, each command was barked with precision, and every second was a battle against the creeping inevitability of death. Liana's body convulsed slightly, her pulse faltering again, a cold sweat dripping from her temples as she fought against the weakness that sought to claim her. She felt the tiny movements of her unborn daughter inside her, a faint flutter, fragile and precious, and she whispered weakly, "Stay. Just a little longer. Please." Her voice cracked, weak and desperate, carrying a plea that could not reach the man she longed for, the man whose pride had barred the path to her voice. Time seemed to fracture inside the operating room. Each second stretched endlessly, the sterile air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the iron tang of blood. The surgical team worked as one, a perfect, urgent symphony, yet every motion felt like a race against the inevitable. Liana's eyelids fluttered, half-lidded, catching the glare of the surgical lights like distant stars. Her heartbeat, faint and erratic, fought against the steady drum of monitors, a fragile rhythm desperate to continue despite her weakening form. The nurse beside her leaned in closer, whispering words of encouragement, hands trembling as she adjusted a monitor, trying to stabilize the tiny, precious life inside. "You're strong. Just a little longer. We're almost there." Suddenly, the heart monitor flatlined. A shrill, unrelenting alarm filled the room, a sound that sliced through the haze of urgency and hope, a cruel punctuation to a battle that had been raging for hours. The doctor's voice rose sharply, commanding, precise, and unwavering. "Code red, we need immediate resuscitation. Prepare for emergency C-section, now!" Nurses and surgical assistants reacted instantly, gloves snapping, instruments ready, adrenaline surging through every pair of hands in the room. Liana's body trembled violently, a final, desperate defiance against the collapse that threatened to claim her completely. She gasped, eyes flickering open, vision blurred, lips moving as if to speak one last command, one final plea, though the words were lost in the roar of urgency. The scalpel made contact, the doctor's hands steady, yet moving with breathless urgency, cutting through layers of tension and tissue with exact precision. Liana's body shook with pain, each movement a testament to the battle she had fought, each groan a reminder of the life she clung to with trembling fingers. Nurses adjusted oxygen masks, pressed lightly against her face, and murmured reassurance that could barely pierce the storm of fear and chaos surrounding her. Through it all, her hands remained protectively over her belly, holding on to the fragile life as though sheer will could shield her daughter from harm. The tiny movements inside her responded, fluttering like a heartbeat in rhythm with the chaotic symphony of the operating room. Then, amidst the chaos, a sound pierced the sterile tension, a fragile, insistent cry. It was small, thin, and delicate, yet it carried with it the miraculous proof that life had not abandoned her completely. A baby girl, tiny and trembling, emerged into the world, her eyes wide, gentle, and already reflective of the mother she would never truly know. Nurses scrambled to secure the newborn, swaddling her carefully, checking vitals, yet even as they worked, they left her in contact with the still weak form of her mother. Trembling, the nurse placed the fragile infant on Liana's chest, allowing a fleeting, miraculous connection, a final bonding that carried more love, hope, and longing than words could ever convey. Liana's fingers, weak and quivering, brushed against the tiny form of her daughter, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and sorrow. The heart monitor beeped violently once more and then fell silent. Liana's chest ceased its rise and fall, the battle she had fought with every ounce of strength finally over. The room seemed to still, as if the world itself paused to absorb the magnitude of what had just occurred. Yet in that stillness, the soft, insistent cry of the newborn girl persisted, a stark, poignant reminder that life could survive even when hope seemed lost. The nurses and doctors worked with careful precision to stabilize the baby, their voices low, gentle, filled with relief and awe. Yet the weight of Liana's passing hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. And then, as though the universe had waited for the cruelest, most precise moment to reveal consequence, Lorenzo's phone vibrated to life in his penthouse. He reached for it, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in parallel with his stubborn ego. The screen lit up, blinding in its insistence, and 26 missed calls from the hospital glared at him with unrelenting accusation. His chest tightened, his hands shook, and a sudden sharp chill ran down his spine. He swiped to see the missed notifications. The magnitude of what he had ignored hitting him like a physical blow. In that moment, the world outside his penthouse ceased to matter. The sprawling city lights, the power he commanded, the empire he had built, all of it faded into insignificance against the weight of what had just occurred. The nurse in the operating room held the baby close to Liana's still form, her eyes brimming with tears, whispering softly, "She's here, and she's beautiful. She's your mother's heart in your hands now." The room hummed with tension, a mixture of grief, relief, and unspoken questions. Each heartbeat of the newborn seemed impossibly loud in the silence that had replaced the alarms, each tiny cry a reminder of the life that had narrowly escaped tragedy. Liana's last breath had left the room, leaving an echo of loss that pressed down like a physical weight, while simultaneously the first sound of her daughter's life rang out, defiant and fragile, claiming the world in a single cry. The doctor stepped back, exhausted, voice low, almost reverent. She survived. Barely. But the mother, we couldn't... The words hung unfinished, swallowed by the enormity of the moment. The nurse clutched the baby tighter, rocking her slightly, murmuring encouragements that seemed both futile and vital, a desperate bridge between the life that had ended and the one that had just begun. The contrast of finality and beginning, of death and birth, pressed on the room like a tangible force, bending time, bending emotion, bending everything into a singular, shattering instant. Even as the newborn's cry continued, insistent and piercing, Lorenzo remained oblivious, unaware that the life-altering consequences of a single choice were waiting just beyond his grasp. And in the operating room, as hearts were mended, tears were shed, and history quietly shifted on its axis. Time itself seemed fractured, holding its breath, waiting for the moment he would finally realize that the cost of a missed call was more than he could ever imagine. 4. Lorenzo's phone vibrated violently in his hand, the 26 missed calls from the hospital flashing like a warning he had ignored for far too long. His breath caught in his throat, each heartbeat pounding in his chest as though trying to escape the sudden weight of realization pressing down on him. He bolted from his penthouse, heels striking the marble floors in a rhythm of panic and dread, the whiskey glass left abandoned on the counter, its amber contents reflecting the city lights in fractured golden shards that mirrored the shattering of his composure. The elevator descended at a torturous pace, each second stretching into an eternity, every passing floor a cruel reminder that he could not rewind the choice he had made, that each moment of inattention had consequences far beyond his control. As the doors opened to the hospital lobby, he burst through with a force that drew startled glances, a tempest of urgency and raw fear propelling him down the gleaming corridors. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat of fate, bouncing off the sterile walls and polished floors. Nurses and doctors turned as he passed, eyes wide with recognition and silent caution, sensing the storm behind his sharp features and tightly clenched fists. His eyes searched desperately, scanning every door, every room number, every possible sign of where she might be, the weight of impending dread pressing his chest with relentless force. His mind raced, flashing through fragmented images, the phone on the marble countertop, the missed calls, the urgent rings unanswered, the pleading whispers that had been lost in distance and pride, every memory he had buried, every moment of stubbornness, every refusal to be vulnerable, came rushing back with cruel precision, stabbing at him like knives with every frantic step. When he finally reached the operating room, the world seemed to narrow, the bustling hospital fading into the periphery, leaving only the sterile space in front of him, a space now marked by a silence so profound it felt unnatural. He pushed open the door, chest heaving, and froze. Liana lay motionless beneath a pristine white sheet, the stillness of her form cutting through him like ice. His legs buckled, knees hitting the cold floor, and he fell forward, hands clutching the delicate, lifeless warmth that had just been a heartbeat ago filled with life. His fingers trembled violently as they traced the outline of her hand, desperate for any sign, any spark, any flicker that might return the warmth he had ignored. "Liana, wake up. Please, don't leave me, not like this." His voice cracked, raw, reverberating against the sterile walls, a sound of desperation, anguish, and regret all at once. The nurse approached cautiously, placing a gentle hand on his arm, her eyes soft yet firm. "Lorenzo, she—" Her voice faltered, the truth pressing down with unbearable weight. He shook his head violently, unable to hear it, unable to comprehend that his absence, his pride, had allowed this to happen. No, you're lying. She can't be gone." His voice rose, a jagged edge of pain slicing through the room, shaking the very air around him. The doctor stepped forward, placing a reassuring but firm hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "Liana, she fought. She gave everything. But sometimes—" Her words hung unfinished, swallowed by the gravity of the moment, leaving Lorenzo with the cruel, undeniable truth. A sob tore from his chest, primal and unrestrained, the sound bouncing off the walls as he pressed his forehead against the cold sheet, covering her, willing warmth, life, anything to return to the body he had once held, the face he had once adored. His mind raced with the memory of every moment he had denied her, every call ignored, every word left unsaid, every foolish, ego-driven choice that had led him to this moment. He felt the weight of time collapse on him, every second he had taken for granted, now screaming in unbearable clarity. The world had narrowed to a single point of loss, a singular, suffocating realization that he had failed the one person who had once made his life whole. Then the doctor handed him something small, delicate, and trembling, a tiny bundle wrapped carefully in soft cloth. The nurse whispered softly, "She looks like her mother. Every bit of her, in her eyes, her hands." Lorenzo's vision blurred instantly, tears spilling down his cheeks as he reached out, fingers shaking violently, and took the newborn into his arms. The warmth of her tiny body, the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat, the faint, fragile breath against his skin. All of it collided with the agony of loss, splitting him in two, shattering the armor he had so meticulously built over years of power and fear. Each breath of the baby was a piercing reminder of the life he could have shared with her, the moments he had thrown away, the love he had failed to protect. His hands shook uncontrollably, holding the child closer to his chest, pressing his forehead against the soft bundle, murmuring broken promises into the tiny ears that could not yet understand the weight of the world into which she had been born. The room seemed impossibly quiet around him, save for the faint whimpers of the newborn, whose tiny cries were the only sound tethering him to the reality he could no longer escape. Every memory of the ignored call, every second of distance he had maintained, every moment of pride-driven cruelty surged forward in his mind, a relentless wave of guilt and anguish that threatened to drown him entirely. The nurse hesitated, glancing at him with careful timing, as though measuring the moment to speak the words that would cut deeper than anything before. Lorenzo's hands shook violently, rocking the baby gently, eyes filled with a mixture of anguish, disbelief, and the rawest kind of sorrow. "Please, tell me she's alive. Please." His voice was a broken whisper, barely audible over the beeping monitors, the soft rustle of hospital linens, the faint hum of life support machines that now held only shadows of what had been. "There's something Liana wanted you to know before she died," the nurse said finally, her voice trembling with the weight of responsibility and fear. Lorenzo froze, the bundle of life in his arms suddenly heavier with anticipation and dread. His breath caught in his throat, eyes widening, chest tightening as every fiber of his being braced for what he might hear. The nurse's gaze met his, steady but soft, holding the intensity of someone who knew the truth could not be softened, could not be delayed, could not be avoided. Lorenzo's mind raced, memories colliding with the present, the ignored calls, the unanswered pleas, the absence of his presence when it had mattered most. The room seemed to tilt, the air thick with the pressure of revelation, every heartbeat of the baby echoing in his chest like a warning. He swallowed hard, trembling, his hands clutching the fragile form that carried the only remnant of the woman he had loved and lost, and waited for the truth to descend upon him, aware in the marrow of his bones that nothing could ever undo what had already been done. And in that waiting, the quiet tension stretched impossibly long, each second a blade suspended over his head, each heartbeat a countdown toward revelation. The life of his daughter, the final words of the woman he had once vowed to protect, the cruel consequences of a single choice, all converged in this one suspended instant, leaving Lorenzo frozen in fear, grief, and anticipation. His hands shook, tears streamed down his face, and the room seemed to hold its breath alongside him, waiting for the truth that would shatter the remainder of his carefully constructed world. 5. Lorenzo's hands shook violently, the newborn cradled close to his chest, warmth against his grief-stricken skin, doing nothing to soothe the cold terror clawing at his heart. The nurse, standing just a step behind, held out a small sealed envelope. It was simple, unadorned, but the weight it carried was unbearable. Her fingers trembled slightly as she passed it to him, as though even touching it might fracture reality further. Lorenzo stared at the envelope, his name scrawled in Liana's familiar handwriting across the front. It was almost too much to bear, a cruel punctuation to the reality that had already shattered his world. His lips quivered, and he pressed a hand to his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat erratic, violent, as if in sync with the chaos that had consumed his life. He tore the envelope with hands that refused to be steady, each movement deliberate but trembling, as though fearing that even a single second too long might erase the words inside. The paper unfolded like a fragile bridge across time, fragile enough to be torn by a single careless touch. He saw the familiar loops of Liana's handwriting, uneven, trembling, a reflection of her final moments, and his chest tightened unbearably. Each word on the page carried the weight of her presence, her love, her fear, and the hope she had clung to even when her body was failing. My love, I hope this finds you, though I fear it might be too late. Lorenzo's eyes scanned the opening lines, and his breath caught. Her handwriting, shaky yet deliberate, was a whisper from the past, a soft plea echoing across the chasm of time and ego he had constructed between them. She apologized for calling, explaining that she did not wish to disturb his life, that she had wanted only a moment to connect, a fleeting chance to bridge the gap left by years of misunderstanding and distance. Each line tore through him like a blade. She wrote of the tiny life she carried, of the hopes she had for their daughter, and of the silent prayers she whispered into the night, hoping that one day he would see the child not just as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of everything beautiful that had once existed between them. Her words painted vivid memories of laughter, stolen glances, late-night conversations, and quiet moments of intimacy that he had once taken for granted, moments that now pressed down on him with unbearable weight. The sorrow in her words was matched only by the tenderness, a reminder that even in death, her love for him, flawed and patient, endured. Lorenzo pressed the letter against his forehead, sobs racking his body, tears cascading freely down his cheeks, each drop a mixture of grief, guilt, and a longing that had been denied for too long. He rocked slightly, the baby in his arms stirring in response to the vibrations, tiny fists curling instinctively against his chest. He buried his face in the bundle, inhaling the faint scent of her, the softness of new life, and the cruel reminder of every moment he had lost. His hands shook violently, gripping the edges of the letter as if holding onto it could somehow bring her back, could somehow turn back time and undo the choices that had brought him to this unbearable reality. Her words continued, each one a dagger and a balm at the same time. She explained that she never hated him, that her love had endured even in the face of heartbreak, even in the moments when she had been forced to walk away for her own survival and the survival of the child she carried. She spoke of prayers whispered in the night for his healing, for his heart to find a capacity for love that he had long denied himself, for the possibility that one day he could recognize the good buried deep beneath the layers of control, fear, and ego that had defined him for so long. Lorenzo's sobs grew louder, his knees buckling beneath the weight of grief, and yet he could not stop reading. The final lines were the cruelest yet the most beautiful. Instructions, wishes, and a trust placed upon him that was more than he had ever deserved. If anything happens to me, give our daughter the life I dreamed of. His hands trembled violently, the words searing into his chest like fire, leaving him gasping for air, overwhelmed by the enormity of responsibility, by the depth of the love he had ignored, and by the realization that the woman he had loved most had entrusted him with their daughter's entire future. The baby stirred again, tiny fingers brushing against his chest, as if aware of the gravity in the room, as if feeling the emotions swirling in the air. Lorenzo pressed his forehead against the fragile crown of her head, tears soaking through the swaddle, sobs racking his body, and the room seemed to tilt around him, time suspended in the unbearable weight of grief and responsibility. Every choice he had made flashed before his eyes. Every missed call, every argument fueled by ego, every moment of pride that had kept him away from her side, converging in a single agonizing realization. He had lost everything that truly mattered. The nurse watched silently, her eyes heavy with the knowledge of how fragile the moment was, how easily the future could unravel if he let despair consume him entirely. Lorenzo, oblivious to her gaze, rocked gently back and forth, murmuring broken words of apology into the tiny ears of the child, who could not yet understand the depth of her father's sorrow. I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I failed you. I failed her. His voice cracked repeatedly, each confession cutting him open further. He read and reread the letter, each pass through her words revealing something new, her gentleness, her wisdom, her unending love, and the burden she had carried silently so he would not be forced to shoulder it. He imagined her face, the curve of her smile, the soft light in her eyes, the warmth of her hands pressed against his chest in moments of intimacy he would never reclaim. Each image stabbed him, and yet he clung to it desperately, the only connection he had left to a woman who had given him everything and received nothing in return. The instructions at the end of the letter burned into him with a gravity he could barely comprehend. Raise their daughter with love. Shield her from harm, honor the dreams and sacrifices of her mother, and live in a way that would make Liana proud. The enormity of it struck him like a physical force, pressing against his chest, bending him under the weight of responsibility and guilt. Every heartbeat of the newborn in his arms was a reminder of both what he had lost and what he now had to protect. The nurse finally spoke, her voice trembling, fragile yet firm, breaking through the fog of grief surrounding him. She trusted you, Lorenzo. She trusted you with everything. You can't let her down. His head lifted slightly, eyes meeting hers, wide, haunted, and raw with realization. The room seemed impossibly still again, filled only with the rhythm of the baby's heartbeat, his ragged sobs, and the unbearable gravity of the words he held. Every choice he had ever made, every moment of absence, every second of pride, had led him to this point. And now the weight of the future rested squarely on his shoulders. Time felt suspended. The letter lay heavy in his hands, the soft weight of paper carrying more power than anything he had ever known. Every breath he took was a battle against despair, every heartbeat a reminder that he had been given a chance he did not deserve, a chance to honor the woman who had loved him despite everything, to protect the child who embodied all that was pure and good, and to confront the man he had allowed himself to become. He pressed the newborn closer, whispering through tears, I won't fail you. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes." The words were fragile, raw, desperate promises, and yet they carried a flicker of hope. The first spark of purpose igniting amid the devastation. The nurse gave him a small nod, acknowledging the first step toward redemption, even as the weight of loss remained immense, threatening to crush him at every heartbeat. And in that room, with the baby's soft whimpers echoing and the letter clutched to his chest, Lorenzo realized, with a clarity that pierced every fiber of his being, that he had lost not just Liana, but every future moment he had assumed he could take for granted. He had lost love, laughter, touch, and the simple joy of presence. But in the tiny life cradled in his arms, he glimpsed the fragile, trembling hope that somehow, through all the guilt, all the grief, and all the mistakes, he could rebuild, honor, and finally understand what it truly meant to love. 6. Lorenzo held the letter in his trembling hands. Staring at the tiny life cradled against his chest, the soft rise and fall of her breaths, a fragile heartbeat against the storm of guilt and grief raging inside him. The weight of responsibility pressed against him like a physical force, and yet beneath it, buried beneath layers of anguish, was a flicker, a fragile ember of purpose he had never known before. That night, when the hospital was quiet and the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, he wrapped the baby girl in a soft blanket, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around his calloused hand, and he whispered broken promises that trembled into the still air. I will keep you safe. I will protect you. I'll love you like she deserved to be loved." The weeks that followed blurred together, each day a delicate balancing act between sleepless nights and desperate devotion. Lorenzo transformed, not as the feared Mafia boss who had commanded armies and ruled through intimidation, but as a man learning to love in the smallest, quietest ways. He changed diapers with trembling hands, fed her with care that bordered on reverence, bathed her tiny body gently, marveling at the delicate perfection of every finger, every curl of hair, every quiet sigh that escaped her lips. Each moment became sacred, each smile, each coo, a thread connecting him to a past he had lost, a past defined by a woman whose absence had left a gaping void in his chest. Every night, as the city of New Verona slumbered beneath the silver glow of moonlight, he would carry his daughter to Liana's grave. The cool stone pressed against his palm, his knees sinking into the soft earth, and he whispered words he had once been too proud, too ego-driven to speak. I failed you both, but I will make it right. I swear I will love her with everything I have, everything I should have given you." The baby, tiny and warm in his arms, cooed softly, unaware of the magnitude of loss and grief surrounding her, yet somehow offering the tiniest spark of solace to a man drowning in regret. Lorenzo shut down every illegal operation with meticulous precision, his empire of shadows disassembling piece by piece. He redirected his wealth, transferring it to charities, hospitals, and initiatives designed to protect the vulnerable. Yet it was not enough simply to act. Every gesture, every donation, every foundation created carried the echo of a guilt that never truly faded. He established the Liana Foundation, named in honor of the woman whose life had been stolen too soon. A foundation dedicated to giving women safety, rights, and dignity. the things she had deserved, the things he had failed to give. Even as the foundation grew, as projects were launched, as lives were saved by the programs he funded, Lorenzo's nights remained haunted. He would lie awake, baby girl tucked safely beside him, staring at the ceiling as the echoes of missed calls and unheard pleas replayed endlessly in his mind. Every laugh, every tiny milestone of his daughter's life was accompanied by the painful reminder that the woman who had created her could never witness these moments. The sorrow and the love collided violently in him, forging a new kind of man, a man capable of tenderness, yet eternally scarred by loss. On the third birthday of his daughter, a small private celebration in the sunlit garden of their estate, Lorenzo was overwhelmed by emotion. Balloons swayed gently in the breeze, a soft birthday song played from a speaker, and the laughter of children echoed faintly from the nearby park. His daughter, tiny fingers sticky with cake frosting, looked up at him with the purest joy, eyes shining bright, and Lorenzo's heart broke and mended in the same instant. But just as he bent down to scoop her up into his arms, a sharp envelope slid through the foundation's mail slot, addressed in handwriting that made his breath catch. He froze mid-step, eyes locking onto the familiar loops and curves he knew better than his own reflection. Liana's handwriting. The envelope lay in his hands like a time bomb, small yet impossibly heavy. His pulse accelerated violently, each beat echoing in his ears, every rational thought dissolving into anticipation and fear. He glanced at the baby in his arms, feeling her tiny fingers curl around his thumb, and a wave of guilt mixed with dread crashed over him. Could it be? His hands trembled as he carefully opened the envelope, revealing a letter that seemed to pulse with the presence of her spirit, her thoughts, her unspoken emotions. Each line he read was a mixture of love, guidance, and quiet instruction, written months or perhaps years before she had passed. Liana's words carried weight beyond death, a message designed to shape the man he had become, to guide the father he had never known he could be. She spoke of dreams she had imagined for their daughter, of hopes for the man she believed he could become, of prayers whispered in the night for the child he now held and for the love and protection he had once denied. Every sentence tore at his heart while simultaneously guiding him, pulling him toward the man he had yet to fully become. The nurse who had delivered the letter had watched him cautiously, unsure of how much he could bear, unsure if the magnitude of her presence through words might shatter him completely. Lorenzo, oblivious to her silent observation, read on, tears streaming down his face, soaking the paper, smudging ink that had been laid down in deliberate care. He trembled violently, hands gripping the edges of the letter, whispering brokenly, I can do this. I have to. I will. The baby stirred in response, tiny eyes blinking in curiosity, as though sensing the storm raging within him and offering the faintest anchor to the present. Outside, the garden was silent, the breeze still, the party paused, the laughter of other children fading into the background. Lorenzo's world had contracted into a single point: the letter, the baby, and the memory of the woman who had loved him enough to plan beyond her own death. His mind raced with questions, possibilities, and the crushing reality that no amount of wealth, influence, or power could ever undo the mistakes that had brought him to this moment. And yet the letter was more than grief. It was a lifeline. Instructions, hopes, dreams, and words of love formed a map for a man who had only just begun to understand what it truly meant to love, to nurture, to be human. Every word was a challenge, a plea, a command. Be the father she could never meet. Be the man she believed he could be. Protect the life she had created from the shadows of his past and honor her memory in every choice he made from this moment forward. Tears blurred his vision as he folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his lips, breathing in the ghost of her presence, the memory of her touch, the echo of her voice whispering in every curve of the handwriting. The baby in his arms reached upward, tiny fingers brushing against his cheek, grounding him in the fragile reality that life, though wounded, had continued. He realized, with a mixture of awe, grief, and determination, that every choice from this moment on would carry the weight of Liana's love, her sacrifice, and her vision for the future. Lorenzo's heart, once hardened by power and ego, now beat with a rhythm dictated by responsibility, love, and a fragile hope that he might redeem himself through the life of the daughter who bore the imprint of her mother's face. Every evening that followed, every moment spent rocking her to sleep, telling her stories of the woman who had been the softest, most brilliant part of his world, became a ritual of remembrance and redemption. Every decision he made for the foundation, every donation, every speech, every act of protection became infused with the memory of Liana. A silent promise echoing in the corridors of his mind. He would honor her, protect their daughter, and live in a way worthy of the trust she had placed in him even after death. And yet, for all his efforts, the shadow of guilt remained, a constant companion reminding him that nothing could undo the past, nothing could restore the moments lost, and nothing could replace the woman who had given him everything and asked for nothing. The weight of her letter, her trust, and her hopes pressed against him every second, forcing him to confront himself, his past mistakes, and the man he had become. Lorenzo held the envelope in trembling hands, the paper feeling impossibly fragile, as if it might crumble under the weight of the moment. His daughter, small and warm in his arms, looked up at him with eyes wide in innocent curiosity, sensing the tension but unaware of the storm raging within him. The garden around them was quiet, sunlight filtering softly through the leaves, but all Lorenzo could hear was the rapid beat of his own heart, echoing the fear, the grief, and the hope that Liana had carefully placed in this message for him to find. With deliberate slowness, he broke the seal, revealing the carefully folded pages inside. His breath caught immediately, her handwriting, precise yet trembling, leapt off the page as though Liana herself were speaking to him from beyond the void. The words were a bridge, a lifeline across time, stretching from her final moments to this very day, meant to guide him through a future she could no longer see with her own eyes. She spoke of dreams, of hope, of love, dreams she had for their daughter, for him, and for the family they might have been. Each sentence struck him like a revelation, each line a memory and a plea intertwined. She wrote of the joy she had imagined him feeling when he first held their child, of the small, everyday victories he would one day witness, the first steps, the first words, the quiet moments of laughter only a parent could know. She described the life she had hoped for their daughter, a life full of warmth, safety, and love, free from the shadows that had defined their own time together. Her words were not bitter. They were patient, understanding, and infinitely forgiving. Her belief in him, buried beneath years of mistakes and scars he had never confronted, shone through each paragraph. She had known he carried darkness within him, had known he had been molded by power, by fear, by choices that had hardened his heart. But she also believed in his capacity for redemption. Her faith in him, despite all he had lost, was almost unbearable to hold. He felt it pressing against his chest, simultaneously a comfort and a punishment, and his knees buckled beneath the weight of her expectations and love. He pressed the letter to his lips, feeling the faint imprint of her handwriting against his trembling mouth, and whispered, I will not fail you. I will not fail her." Tears streamed freely down his face, soaking the envelope, but he did not care. In that moment, the world around him, the sunlit garden, the soft cooing of his daughter, the faint rustle of leaves, faded, leaving only the presence of her words and the responsibility they carried. He was no longer the man who had ignored her call, the man who had let pride dictate his actions. He was a father now, a man reborn in grief and love, tasked with fulfilling a vision she had entrusted to him, even beyond death. He walked to Liana's grave, the small figure of his daughter nestled securely against him, her tiny fingers clutching his coat. Each step was heavy with reverence, each breath a mixture of sorrow and determination. As he knelt beside the cold stone, he placed the baby gently on the soft grass, her tiny hands brushing the engraved letters of her mother's name. The air was thick with emotion, a solemn quietude that pressed upon his chest, mingling with the unspoken guilt of all the moments he had lost. He lowered himself to his knees, his forehead resting against the cold granite, tears soaking the earth beneath him, and he whispered through ragged breaths, "Liana, I failed you. I failed us. But I promise, I will honor you. In every heartbeat of our daughter, in every choice I make, I will be the man you believed I could be." The baby in his lap looked up at him, sensing the gravity of the moment, and leaned forward to hug his shoulders, tiny arms pressing against him in pure trust and innocence. "Daddy, why are you crying?" her voice asked, small and unknowing, yet cutting through the layers of his grief with gentle precision. He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering on the soft skin that mirrored the mother she would never meet, whispering, "Because you look just like your mommy, and I'm trying to be the man she believed I could be." The words were a bridge across time, a promise and a confession all at once, spoken into the quiet air where only the echoes of the past could respond. Each day became a ritual of remembrance, love, and purpose. Lorenzo raised their daughter with a devotion that bordered on reverence, recounting stories of her mother with a tenderness he had never known he could possess. He described her courage, her laughter, her soft strength, ensuring that even in absence, Liana's presence shaped every step of the child's life. Each story, each bedtime whisper, each moment of gentle guidance became a lifeline between the past and the present, between loss and redemption. As the years passed, Lorenzo's devotion never wavered. He visited her grave daily, no matter the weather, rain or shine, carrying the weight of memory and promise with him. His arms carried the child, now toddling into her earliest years, as he knelt before the stone, whispering words he wished he had spoken while Liana still drew breath. Every tear shed, every whispered apology, every heartfelt promise forged the bond between father and daughter, binding them in a love that transcended the shadow of regret. He became a man transformed, not through power or control, but through grief and the profound responsibility of love. His heart softened without losing its strength, his decisions shaped by compassion and conscience, and his empire redirected into a life of protection, charity, and justice. Every action he took was measured against the memory of Liana and the child who now carried her essence. His legacy became defined not by fear or violence, but by care, protection, and the relentless pursuit of righting the wrongs of his past. And on quiet evenings, as gray clouds gathered across the sky and the soft wind whispered through the trees, he would stand above Liana's resting place, holding their daughter close, and make a silent vow. Every breath he took, every moment he lived, would be in service to the memory of the woman he had lost, the life he had been entrusted with, and the hope that he could finally become the man she had always believed was within him. He finally understood, with crystal clarity, that the moment he had declined her call, the one act that had seemed so trivial in the heat of ego and pride, was the moment he had lost forever. Yet in that loss, a life remained, radiant and alive. A beacon of all that was good, pure, and infinitely precious. The daughter she had left behind became more than a reminder of regret. She became his reason to live, his compass, his redemption, and the legacy of love that could never be taken away. And so, beneath the gray sky, surrounded by silence and the weight of memory, Lorenzo DeLuca, once feared and untouchable, finally understood the true meaning of power, love, and sacrifice. He carried her name, her memory, and her spirit in every heartbeat, every decision, and every moment of his life, vowing that the future, though born of tragedy, would be a life forged in love, honor, and the enduring light of the woman who had changed everything. The unanswered call had cost him everything, but the daughter she left behind became everything he could ever hope to protect, love, and cherish. The wind whispered softly through the graveyard, carrying with it a sense of peace, and Lorenzo, holding the child tightly, finally allowed himself to imagine a future shaped not by loss, but by devotion, love, and the unbreakable bond between a father and the daughter who had given him a second chance at life. And in that moment the city of New Verona seemed to pause, as if bearing witness to the transformation of a man, the power of a woman's love, and the life that became the reason he would never surrender, never falter, and never forget. And that's the journey of love, loss, and redemption. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine. If you felt the emotions, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart-Woven Tales for more stories that stay with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part moved you the most? Comment below and let's keep this story alive together. Until next time, I'm your storyteller, Selena, reminding you that every heart has a tale worth telling.